We are building the Sports Heroes project from the YByte Python curriculum available at www.ybyte.in. Previously, we saw how we created a set of all the winners. Now, clearly, this set has only unique values, which means that every player has been covered only once in the set because that's a fundamental definition of a set. Now, given that we have this, let's say, set which has all the unique value, all the unique names, a bunch of questions come up. For example, how many times has a given player won this tournament? Which country does this player play for? In which years has the player won? In fact, we can go on and create many such questions. In this video, we'll see how we will, how we can possibly answer these questions given the data that we have available. The interesting bit is that even though we cannot index into sets as we have seen, but we can still run a for loop over it, and that makes it quite interesting. And that is exactly what we are going to do in this video. Now we are going to make use of a bunch of data structures. So I thought before writing any code, I will just give you an overview of what we are doing so that the big picture is clear, and then we don't get lost in, let's say, some of the inner details. Basically, like I said, I have a set of winners. I call it the winner set. Clearly, every name here is unique. So every name appears once and only once because this is a set. Now, for every winner on this set, I'm going to probe the tournament data, which is where I started. Remember, which was a list of dictionaries, which has basically an yearly representation, for example, 1968, 1969, 1970, and so on and so forth. Each of those entries is a dictionary, and hence we have a list of dictionaries. For every winner in the set, I'm going to probe this, let's say, list and find out when all does this particular name appears, because then that is kind of like what I call selected, also a list of dictionaries. But this dictionaries inside the selected list are for a given winner. In fact, this operation is quite similar to what we were doing in, let's say, the laptop store. Now, essentially, I have filtered, let's say, this list to start with, and from there created information related to a given player. I'm going to present this information a little bit differently in form of a dictionary, and I'll create a dictionary for a given player. So basically for a given player, I'll go and probe this, let's say, tournament data, find out where all I see this name that goes into my selected. From this selected, I'll extract some information and I will put this in a dictionary called player info. We will consolidate all of this inside a list called winners info list. Now this is again a list of dictionaries because player info for one player basically will get, let's say, collected in a list for all. Then this list here becomes like a processed version of the original tournament data, and that basically contains data in a way that we can present it and presents us, let's say, more ready insights. Now, having understood, let's say, this bit of the the view, let's start coding this because that's when this becomes more clear. So I come into my my program that I've been developing. Like I said, I will create a winners, let's say, winners info list. Now this is going to be a list of dictionaries. However, for now I just initialize it to an empty list. Now I run a for loop on my winners set because that's the set of all unique names. So I just go and say, well, for player, for example, player in, say, winners, say, set. Now make sure this is winners set, not the winners list, because we want to run on every unique player, and then only then this kind of makes sense, right? So I just go and say for player in winners set. Well, let me first create an empty dictionary. Remember, I just use, let's say, say, for example, clear brackets here, empty curly brackets here. Remember, now I will do list comprehension to basically figure out, look, where all in this tournament data do I get my, let's say, this particular player coming in. So we'll just see how this goes. So I say selected is equal to, let's say, chosen, chosen for chosen. Okay, so chosen in T data. If, let's say, chosen champion is equal to, say, the player. Now remember, player here is part of the for loop, which means player takes on values from the winner set. I just go and say, okay, look, let me find out, where all does this player appear in the tournament data, and that goes into my selected. Now, for now, just for illustration, let's say I just go and say winners let's say set is just for now. I say, let's say the only winner I'm interested in is, let's say, Pete Sampras. Again, just for example, just for illustration, when I, let's say, run this piece of code, now clearly the for loop will just run over one value in the winner set. Because again, I'm just doing this for the illustration right now. So when I, let's say, do this, let's say, sports.py, if I look at my list selected, that is a list of dictionaries. We can see it very clearly. So selected here is, let's say, so let's say type of selected is a list of dictionaries. And if I were to look at, let's say, len of selected, that tells me with, well, there are 7 items of that. And you notice that on each of these items, which are all dictionaries, the champion is Pete Sampras. So Pete Sampras is champion here in each of them. And that's exactly what this statement is doing. Again, this is, as I just said, very, very, very similar to what we were doing in the laptop store. In that case, we had a list of dictionaries. Each dictionary represented a laptop. And we did some kind of filtering on that based on the user specs. Something very similar is going on over here. Now having obtained, let's say so I'll just put this here, for example, let's say all the times the player has won. So basically that has been captured, let's say, in this list selected. I will update the player info. So I'll just go and say, well, update the player info dictionary. Remember, player info is a dictionary, and the updation is actually quite straightforward in some sense. I will create the key and the values. So I just go and say player, say info, for example, name. Now notice these keys are not the same keys as the tournament data, let's say those dictionaries in the tournament data, but that's perfectly fine, right? So name is, for example, player info, let's say country. Now I can just read the very first values country, because that's perfectly fine. Remember, the player may have only one item in the selected if he has won the Wimbledon only once. So I just go and say selected 0. That's why I look at the very first item, and in that I look for the key country. So that, that's for the player infos, the player's country. Say player info, for example, say times 1. Well, that is clearly the length of, say, selected, because every time the player has won, that item has appeared now in the list. So length of that list tells me how many times the player has won it. Next, I want to find out in which all years has the player won it. For example, here, notice, Pete Sampras has won this in 1993, 1994, 1995, 1997, and so on. Now, clearly, the player may have won once, player may also have won more than once. So, which means that I need a list to store this information. So, for this particular key, I will put the value as a list. In fact, I will start with an empty list because I do not know, how many times the player has won it. I just go and say, well, years, say, for example, 1. I put this to an empty list. Now, as part of a for loop, now notice this for loop is nested in the outer for loop. I just run a for loop on the selected list. So I just go and say, well, for KK in, let's say, selected, I just go and update this list by saying that, look, player info, let's say, years, say 1, dot append KK, let's say, year. Now this may look a little bit confusing, but really not. Once when I run, basically when I run this for loop, KK is a dictionary from this list selected. So I'm just saying that, okay, look for every, every item on this list, basically, which means that for in each of these dictionaries, find out the year and append that to this, let's say, years 1. It will become clear when we take an example. And that's pretty much all I need, really. So again, let's illustrate this better by saying that, okay, let me just run this over one player first. When I do this, for example, now when I look at selected, that's a list of, let's say, dictionaries. Little bit hard to see, but if I were to look at player info, much cleaner, because now I have a dictionary which tells me, well, look, I'm looking at name Pete Sampras because that's what I've given. Country is USA, times 1 is 7. So Pete Sampras won this tournament 7 times. Quite amazing. And the years that he won it in, won the tournament in were 1993, 94, 95, 97, 98, 99, 2000. Clearly, all of this information is actually contained in this data, but it's not so obvious when we see it in this form. By having done our analysis, we have put it in a form which is much more, let's say, easy to understand. Now, in the real program, obviously, we will comment this out, later on, so that the whole set of sequence runs on every player, and then we will put this in a file, in a nice way, so that we can see this very, very easily. We can easily infer what is going on in there because the data will appear in a tabular format. Now, I hope this has been interesting. Go through it slowly because a lot of very interesting usage of data structures is available here. As we see, we are using dictionaries, lists, uh, as in list of dictionary, and also the set all together to create something quite interesting, quite useful. Learning this way by building examples, building activities, applying concepts to activities makes learning much more interesting because then the concept comes alive and we see why we are using it. That's how we learn Python at YByte. Please look at our website www.ybyte.in because we have many, many, many such activities. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye bye.